Hello, friends. It's Chapo.
The future, Mr. Cross. Retweets aren't endorsement jokes in 2022. Big if
Forget
true, quote tweets.
Forget it, Jake. It's a homeless person. I just like one more thing about the Miller dynasty here is that eventually, I mean, like obviously, like her family still doesn't own 1.3 million acres of land in California. I mean, like that's been since sold off. But the one thing that they still do own is the hereditary water rights to all of the land that Henry Miller did at one time own. So that means that they're basically the single largest private owner of water in the state of California. So congratulations to any of our listeners in California. If you've used water anytime as a state resident, you're paying Nellie Bowles and her family.
Well, I mean, it's not like it's really scarce here.
I would also recommend do not get addicted to the water because you will resent its absence.
But, you know, a hell of a way for Nellie to begin this article about, you know, how she's, you know, like her authentic connection to the city that her family owns. She says, my grandmother's favorite insult was to call someone dull. I learned young that it was impolite to point when a naked man passed by, groceries in hand. If someone wanted to travel by unicycle or be a white person with dreadlocks or raise a child communally among a group of gays or live on a boat or start a ridiculous sounding company, that was just fine. Between the bead curtains of my aunt's house, I learned that you had to let your strangeness breathe. It was always weird, always a bit dangerous. Once when I was very little, a homeless man grabbed me by the hair, lifting me into the air for a moment before the guy dropped me and my dad yelled. For years, I told anyone who would listen that I'd been kidnapped. Okay, so she has like a long-standing pattern of exaggerating,
of being
exaggerating criminal. Yeah,
a big baby. So listen up, folks. As the big baby, hey, folks, the big baby's speaking.
So yeah, when she was a kid, she said a homeless person kidnapped her, and now she's saying, you know, now just keep that in mind for the context of the rest of this article. She writes, but every compromise San Francisco demanded was worth it. The hills are so steep that I didn't learn to ride a bike until high school. Fucking moron. Jesus Christ.
High school? What?
High school, yeah.
Not that hard. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There's a couple straightaways in San Francisco.
Yeah, it's not all hills. Yeah. Let's go to Golden Gate Park. It's fine. She says, I didn't learn to ride a bike until high school, but every day I saw the bay and the cool fog rolling in over the water. When puberty hit, I asked the bus driver to drop me off where the lesbians were, and he did. So as a child, blatantly exaggerating claims of a street crime that happened to her for clout. And then also saying that, like, as a teenager, she just demanded that a city bus driver let her off where the lesbians are, and they complied.
I mean, I guess a limo is a type of bus, right? That is shocking. That is shocking. Holy, yeah. That's never happened. Not to her, to anyone ever.
She said, when puberty hit, I asked the bus driver to drop me where the lesbians were, and he did. A passenger shouted.
Talk about. I'm sorry, but like, talk about fucking horseshoe theory. This is like a fucking Tumblr hosted like queer tendercore webcomic. The same thing happens in Nellie Bowles' article about why we should like kill heroin users as one of those. That's amazing.
No, it gets even better. A passenger shouted that he'd hoped I'd find a nice girlfriend, and I waved back, smiling, my mouth full of braces and rubber bands. So much, just, okay, so it's basically she was just like, a scion of the family that owns all of Northern California here on a city public bus. Hey, could you just let me off where the lesbians are? And the bus driver was like, right away, Nellie, right away. Please don't tell your parents. Please don't tell your parents I looked at you. And then and all the passengers on the bus were like, good luck, Nellie. We hope you get a girlfriend.
Yeah. Oh my God! Yeah,
so much.
It's the opposite of eating beans in Cars too. The whole bus cheered. This girl's eating box.
So much has been written about the beauty and the mythology of this city that maybe it's superfluous to add a little more to the ledger. If he ever got to heaven, Herb Caen, the town's beloved old chronicler, once said he'd look around and say, it ain't bad, but it ain't San Francisco. The cliffs, the stairs, the cold, clean air, the low-slung beauty of the sunset, the cafes tucked along narrow street, then Golden Gate Park drawing you down from the middle of the city all the way to the beach. It's so goddamn whimsical and inspiring and temperate, so full of redwoods and wild parrots and the smell of weed and sourdough. brightly painted homes and backyard chickens, lines for the oyster bar, and gorgeous men in chaps at the leather festival. But it's maddening because the beauty and the mythology, the preciousness, the self-regard are part of what has almost killed it. And I, now in early middle age, sometimes wish it weren't so nice at all. So in her roster of things that she finds whimsical and endearing about San Francisco, she includes the smell of weed. So, as she might describe now, open air drug use, and public displays of gay male sexuality, like, like leather daddies and, guys in police hats and, like the Tom of Finland stuff happening on the streets in the Castro or whatever. Which is, interesting because, like, open air drug use and open displays of adult sexuality are things that people might often associate with a failed city. But it's a matter of like but now it's like people using heroin on the street is terrible. But I granted, like I would say there's it's on a spectrum here. It's on a spectrum between one and the other. But these are the things that Nellie abides, but the things she doesn't are like the sense of lawlessness and petty crime and car theft. By the way, Nellie wrote an article for the Substack she writes for about like the crime wave in San Francisco, about her car got stolen, and her car got stolen because she left the keys in the cup holder.
Oh my God!
Where that'll happen? That will happen anywhere. Come on, you can't. That's pretty basic stuff.
I hate this, bragging about how dangerous your city is versus my city by people who really, don't bear any of the brunt of it. But if it just sounds like, judging by her leaving the keys in the car and being shocked it got stolen, if her plane passed over Chicago, the entire water rights for California would somehow belong to the gangster disciples.
She writes, but I do need you to love San Francisco a little bit, like I do a lot, in order to hear the story of how my city fell apart and how it just might be starting to pull itself back together. Because yesterday, San Francisco voters decided to turn their district attorney, Chesa Boudin, out of office. They did it because he didn't seem to care that he was making the citizens of our city miserable in service of an ideology that made sense everywhere but in reality.
Oh, yeah, he's making them miserable, not like this city. Not like everything that I saw there before he was even a fucking candidate. Him.
She says, it's not just about Bowdoin, though. There is a sense that on everything from housing to schools, San Francisco has lost the plot. The progressive leaders here have been LARPing left-wing values instead of working to create a livable city. And many San Franciscans have had enough. I would like to know, like, the definition of what a livable city is, though. Because, I am sympathetic to the idea of, if there's a huge population of, like the homeless and mentally ill and people fixing smack in broad daylight, that does lead to a sense that it's not a safe place, or it's just like, I don't think the answer to it should be like, oh, like that this is good and like people, they should be essentially like left alone to do their own thing. But like, I don't think the answer is certainly like, criminalizing it or looking at a city like with a housing crisis as bad as San Francisco and being like, oh, like the homeless people and the drug addicts themselves are what's causing this problem.
Again, like a place I've been many times before, really, yeah, only before Boudin. And I saw the same thing constantly, which is just, people suffering in any multitude of ways out in the streets to varying degrees. And I asked the question, I remember, like, how much is too much? Like, what is your exact point for your brain registers this too much? Which I guess is a fair question to anyone living in America, right? Because we're all pretending we don't see something. But for San Francisco in particular, it's I really think this is the most marginal of marginal outward differences in human suffering you're seeing, if any.
And, I agree with Nellie that San Francisco is a gorgeous city, but it happens to be one of the most expensive cities in the country, if not the most expensive. And I think like a lot of the people who, were behind the recall effort, have, sort of like gotten to this idea that like there are so many homeless people in San Francisco because they're all coming there because of the city's lenient policies regarding drug use or just its temperate climate. And the truth is that, like, probably like the vast majority of the homeless population in California are California residents who at one time were housed in the state and then just slid out of it. Like, I'm sure there's a certain amount of people traveling there because it's easier to be homeless in a generally warmer climate, or in a city where like there are better, I don't know, like more lenient drug policies or something like that. But I mean, San Francisco is a gorgeous city, but I mean, like I just want to like I wish someone would have to like define what makes a city livable or not, because it certainly isn't livable for the huge population of unhoused and mentally ill. Doesn't seem livable at all.
It would have to spend money on things that lower the prices of real estate. It would have to increase significantly affordable housing options, which that lowers. I'm sorry, it lowers it reduces scarcity, so it lowers prices, and that they will not, the people who run the city, like the capital formations, and then the strand of people who vote in every election, all have a unified interest in preventing that from happening. So they're just going to blame people like Budin for not fixing something that they don't actually want to fix, and that's what these kind of guys exist to do, to be whipping boys for this, to excuse their next round when they decide, okay, we're gonna do Manzanar for homeless people. You made us do it because you didn't wave a fucking wand and fix this thing that we are structurally opposed to actually addressing.
And Nelly does get into this like NIMBY versus YIMBY dichotomy that's going on in San Francisco, and like blames a lot of the problems on NIMBYs, which is certainly a thing, especially in San Francisco, of kind of like older, wealthier liberals who don't want anything new constructed because it might fuck up their view of the Bay or something like that. And it's like, the YIMBYs who want to, have better zoning so you can build bigger and build more housing. But like the problem with the YIMBY thing, we've talked about this before, is it's not that they like want to like build more stuff. It's that it's all just a front for real estate developers. Like they just want to like let the market rip and create tons of like new housing, but the housing that will be totally unaffordable to anyone who needs it.
Just a more sink for fucking for dead money to sit, which is what that's why you cannot build your way privately out of this problem, because real estate in cities like this will be valuable if you let the market decide it, and that there's so few places to profitably invest money now that real estate is really one of the only ones left. So the more of those units you build, you're not going to run out of money that will park there. So that means you're never actually addressing the need for affordability.
I do wonder though whether like because like we know the people funding the recall, and obviously like the media and things like that. I do wonder though, like to what extent like portraying cities as failed cities where you can't even walk outside without being robbed, or like that an endemic lawlessness because people are like shoplifting out of Walgreens or whatever. I do wonder whether that is part of like a certain real estate speculation pump and dump to like sort of like in the short term lower the property values of a neighborhood, then buy it up and then jack up the prices.
The classic Police Academy City Under Siege plot. We all remember that one.
Now, as mayor, he knew the property along the rail link route was going to be very valuable. So he had his gang set up a crime wave in that area to devalue the property so he could buy it up cheap.
You mean this was all just a real estate scam?
$1 billion real estate scam, sir.
Take him away.
Take me away. Oh, how rude. How rude. Woo!
And, like, I'm not going to, like, the rest of the article is, like, I don't think there's much of a need to read it. Like, Nelly, she has a lot of stories about, like, people, my inclination is to mostly believe, or, stories about, like, people suffering and the lack of, like, city government's ability to deal with that suffering. But the answer, like, but she never really, she says that, like, Budin's policies are, like, on their own popular, but he is not. Or that people think it sounds good, but in practice they don't work. I would just like some articulation of what she thinks would be a better policy, or what would work. If the goal is to reduce the ambient level of like human misery and suffering that like is now just like an openly accepted part of everyday life in the richest cities on the planet.
So the thing is, people like the job of people like Nellie Bowles is not to actually propose that. They're to ruefully accept it as an unpleasant necessity when it happens, when someone else does it. When someone else rolls up their sleeves and gets serious, they can just be like, well, this is the sad result of the decline of liberalism and its failure to meet the challenges of a changing world. Like